Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks very much for coming. To begin, I'd like to thankfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Nunavut First Nations, and we are very grateful and thankful to be able to work, play, and learn on these territories and these lands. I'd also like to put out a thank you and a welcome to the 2025-2026 Colloquium series. My name is Leon Potter. I'm the chair of the theatre department and on the board for the Colloquium series. And I would like to gratefully acknowledge and thank all of you for coming. And I'd like to thank Catherine and the Arts and Humanities Department for the support of the Arts and Humanities Department and support of the Colloquium series here. Please join us. We have a number of colloquiums coming up, so keep an eye out for all of those. This will also be live streamed as well, so if you want to catch it at home, you can. In the meantime, I would like to welcome Bryn, who is the chair of the Colloquium series on the whole Colloquium series. Pardon? The circus. Who is the chair of the circus? Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Bryn.
Hi, Nathal, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the first of our Colloquium series this semester. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Eliza Gardiner in advance of her talk today. As a somewhat new member of the Arts and Humanities faculty, I've only recently started working with Eliza, but I can tell you it doesn't take much time to discover that she is a veritable font of energy and enthusiasm for teaching and for the theater, which will be two of the topics of her talk today. In a brief conversation, you'll note she really exudes joy and creativity in every endeavor, whether that be in teaching or where we also work together on Senate for Colloquium. But in advance of working with her on this Colloquium, I had the opportunity to discover just how deep and how rich her knowledge and research and innovation goes into Greek theater, applied theory, and the theater of the oppressed. Indeed, Eliza's over 20 years of teaching spans from researching 5th century tragedies and Greek and Roman plays to performing a one-woman rock musical at the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, as well as creating opportunities for actors of all ages and abilities to perform on stage. She will speak to some of these topics and some of her more recent research today. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce my lovely colleague, Professor Eliza Gardiner.
Thank you, Bryn. Hi, everyone. It's exciting for me to be here sharing my research with you. Those of you who know me know that I'm ever inspired with my work here at Vancouver Island University, and am so honored and privileged to be able to do my research and teaching and learning and growing as a human being on the traditional territory of the Nunavut First Nation. So thank you so much for having me here in my home venue. My office is just backstage if you ever want to visit me. The beautiful Malasipina Theatre, staffed today by some hardworking, early rising theater students. Shout out to the booth first thing this morning. So you're going to help me today practice. Learning is all about practicing, and today I'm developing hopefully the final draft of a paper that is slated for publication in the Athens Institute Journal of the Humanities. So it's a fairly scholarly perspective that fuses a study of criminological theory with an analysis of a renowned Greek play by Sophocles called Antigone. Antigone by Sophocles, written around 422 BC, is about one day in the lives of the daughters of Oedipus. In the Sophoclean tragedy that precedes this plot, Oedipus Tyrannus, or more often called in the Latin, Oedipus Rex, The 4 children of this king of Thebes survived the death of their mother, Jocasta, by suicide, and the ostracization of their father and half-brother after his self-mutilation upon finding himself guilty of incest and murder. Sisters Antigone and Ismena and brothers Eteocles and Polynices are fostered out to Uncle Creon, the new king and rightful heir to the city-state of Thebes. The play takes place a couple days after the boys have just killed each other in the accumulating battle of a 7-year war for power and control over Thebes, the 7-gated city, a rich center for culture and economics. This double suicide leaves the 2 orphaned sisters brotherless and still under the command of Creon. Upon their deaths, Eteocles is deemed a hero because he sided with Creon, while Polynices is labeled a traitor to the state. Creon honors Eteocles with a full customary funeral and decrees that Polynices will be left unburied and unwept, a sweet treasure for the birds to feed on to their heart's content. This does not sit right with Antigone. She debates, should she respect the king's edict that denies sacred burial rites for the bad brother Polynices? Or should she obey the will of the gods, who advise that all the dead require and deserve ceremonial service to their body in order that their soul be sanctified after death? Antigone discusses the options with Ismena. But what better way to prove the outset of the story than to be a little bit theatrical? We are in a theater after all, and I am a professor here in the theater department at VIU. So let's see if we can't inspire a little audience participation. Is there anyone out there who'd like to volunteer? I need 2 readers. I see some hands. Wow, it looks great out there. Thank you. Right here in the 3rd row, and we have a nice person here in the 2nd row. Come on up. Give them a round of applause, friends. Thanks so much, Sam. Thanks, and Bonnie. Good to see you. So we're going to begin today with Act 1, Scene 1 of the Antigone, where sister arrives quite quickly in search of Antigone. Antigone is outside the palace, wondering what she will do. Take it away, readers.
Sister, sister, Antigone, good news, the war is over. The city is safe at last from invading forces.
Dear Ismene, my only blood sister, you have little sense of all the troubles the great gods keep bringing down on the 2 of us.
I am well aware of the misery that stems from our doomed father, Oedipus, and the shame and dishonor he caused us. But the armies have retreated.
The curse of Oedipus hangs like a yoke of torment around our necks. And today, unhappiness, calamity, and disgrace rise with the sun. As long as we're alive, misery, suffering, and destruction will follow us. The troubles of others don't even compare. Haven't you heard the latest rumors?
What are people saying?
Have you missed the gossip? The news brings humiliation better fit for our enemies piled up on the ones we love.
What is the word, Antigone? Whether good or bad, tell me. I have heard nothing. Not since we 2 lost both our brothers, killed on the same day by a double sword blow. The enemy army has left Thebes, but I don't know if we've been lucky or if we face total ruin.
Listen to what our uncle, King Creon, is doing with our 2 brothers. He's honoring one with a full funeral and treating the other one disgracefully. Eteocles has had his burial according to our customary rites, to win him honor with the dead below. But for Polynesius, who perished so miserably, an order has gone out throughout the city. Creon says he's to have no funeral or lament, but to be left unburied and unwept, a sweet treasure for the birds to feed on to their heart's content.
That's what noble Creon has announced?
Yes, and now he's coming to proclaim the fact, to state it clearly to all who have not yet heard. Anyone who acts against the order will be stoned to death before the city. If anyone disobeys the decree, they will be publicly executed.
Oh, my poor sister.
Now, you must demonstrate whether you are nobly born or else a girl unworthy of her splendid ancestors.
What can I do?
Think quickly on whether you will work with me.
What do you mean?
Will you help me take Polynesius' corpse and bury it?
You dare to bury the body when it's illegal?
Yes, I'll do my duty to the gods and to my brother.
You're too rash. Creon has expressly banned the act.
He has no right to keep me from honoring the gods.
Will you defy the law?
No earthly edict can be stronger than heavenly bonds.
Think, Antigone. Consider how our father suffered when that hateful woman, his mother and his wife, Jocasta, destroyed her own life in a twisted noose. Think of how Oedipus suffered great punishment when those mistakes, which his own search revealed, forced him to turn his hand against himself and stab out his own eyes. Consider our two brothers, both butchered in a single day, that ill-fated pair who slaughtered one another and brought about their common demise. Think of the two of us now, left here quite alone. We'll die far worse than all the rest if we break the law and act against the king's royal power. We must remember that by birth, we're women who shouldn't fight with men. The rulers are stronger than the ruled, and we must obey and seek forgiveness from the dead. What use are senseless gestures of revolt?
Enough. Be still. The moment's past when you could join with me. You've made your choice, but I will bury him, and I will welcome death in doing it. I will commit a crime against the laws of men, while you choose to show contempt for rules the gods honor. To please the living is a passing thing, but in death we dwell forever.
I'm not disrespecting the divine, but I cannot act against the state. Creon is too strong.
Let that be your weak excuse. Now, I'm going to make a burial mound for my dear brother.
I won't reveal what you intend. I'll keep it hidden.
I despise your silence. Tell the world. Shout it in the streets.
Passion is not power. You're doomed to fail.
When my strength is gone, then I will have failed.
A vain attempt should not be made at all.
One more word and I will hate you forever. 2 words and the newly dead will haunt you day and night. Go.
You go, if that's what you think is right. But I will love you even though your mission is madness.
If I am crazy, then leave me to it. The worst that can befall me is that I will die an honorable death.
Antigone rushes away, and Ismena re-enters the palace. Wow. Thank you so much for volunteering. You're such good cold readers. My goodness, is there anyone in the room who knows what good actors these two students really are? We know each other. I'll just admit it. So thank you so much, Sam and Bonnie. Both students are registered this fall semester in My Scholarly Dream Come True, the interdisciplinary course that fuses applied theater with criminological theory. It's coded INTR 104, and students this week read Antigone. And so 2 of them are here this morning to help me start out this story of sisters deciding whether to break the law of man and to bury the brother or to respect the laws of the gods, which for Antigone clearly, almost instinctively, is the only choice. Antigone decides to go with her conscience Ismena realizes quickly her sister is sure to disobey. Ismena cautions against disobeying and tries to convince Antigone to be compliant. Ismena opts out of any involvement. Antigone weighs her odds, figures she's doomed to die anyway in a doomed family, and rationalizes that she would rather go in the good graces of the gods, guaranteeing their blessing by burying her brother. German idealist philosopher Hegel wrote in the early 1800s about Antigone's conscientious conviction. He calls the play, in a number of his works, the most sublime and in every respect most excellent work of all time. In his ideal vision of the family, Hegel ranks the brother-sister relationship highest in building opportunity for equitable mutual recognition. This was Hegel's thing. The goal of human existence is to recognize oneself. So, because the brother and sister are so alike, self-realization through the other is tangible. The brother, for Hegel, is for the sister a passive similar being. And the recognition of sister in brother is pure and unmixed with any natural, aka sexual, desire. Transcended through the process of recognition into identities that are different yet unified, the brother-sister relationship is mutually beneficial and complete. For Hegel, the loss Antigone suffers when Polynices dies proves the depth of this sibling connection. When Antigone no longer has that reciprocal recognition, her self-identity is crushed, her self-awareness suffers, and she's compelled to honor and remember Polynices after death. Suffering this irreparable loss, Antigone focuses her energy on her trust in the gods and her familial duty to her brother. Family comes fifth on the list of central 8 risk-need factors in the general personality and cognitive social learning, otherwise known as the GPCSL. This is a perspective of criminal behavior that is written by Andrews and Bonta in 1994 and 2010. Adjustments were made, and this list of 8 factors has important impact when we assess criminal activity today. This GPCSL is used by the Correctional Service of Canada in risk need assessment for offender rehabilitation. So it's important to look at the 8. I'll list them at the end. I think you know some of them. What do you think a risk factor is that might determine a person's interest or confusion or decision to commit a crime? What do you think a risk factor is? Age could factor in, your social positioning, absolutely. What's another one? Gender factors in, absolutely. What's another one? Class, definitely. These are all in that social realm. There's other factors that include, for example, criminal history, exposure to crime in your youth. Those are 1 and 2. Okay, we're going to look at number 5 just for a moment, family. It's important in the GPCSL to assess a person's familial relationships. Maybe someone has a traumatic family history. There could be issues of abuse, neglect, addiction that determine someone's behavior. Antigone's disobedience brings attention to the risks that we can assess using this tool in her lifetime. So far, do you think she had a pretty solid childhood? What happened? What more do you need to say? She's been exposed, friends, to a horrendous history of crime in her family. Her mother attempts infanticide on her wee baby when he's just 3 days old. That boy grows up, in fact, to fulfill his destiny that was predicted, which he will become a murderer of his own father and sleep with his mother. Suicide is also present in Antigone's childhood, as well as being fostered or adopted. These are all factors that our tool looks at in current day assessment, and we can see, even just by using it for a moment, that these indicators exist, that inappropriate parental monitoring and discipline was likely part of the vibe, and that poor family relationships puts Antigone at risk. Intervention goals in our contemporary way of using the tool are listed also in the research. And so, for example, if we came across an offender who had this type of background, we would want to intervene in order to correct and rehabilitate. Treatment methods then could include educating the parents, enhancing warmth and caring in the household. Antigone, with these risk factors residing in her background and her psyche, even under the threat of death, sneaks to the courtyard where the corpse of Polynices is exposed to the elements and the ravaging of dogs and crows. She sprinkles dust on the body and mutters some prayers before getting caught. She is taken to Creon to stand trial. The lawmaker is also the judge. She's charged with a kind of civil disobedience. In Canada, there is no specific crime of civil disobedience per se, but conflict with the law arises when people, for example, protest for environmental values, and they're deemed to have obstructed or interfered with the rights of others. That's when criminal sanctions typically result. Some factors that result in charges include if the conduct involves violence resulting in physical harm, assault, serious property damage with the intent to cause more serious property damage, disrupting public access to spaces, assault, and if any emergency personnel are jeopardized, then you're sure to be charged. Antigone, rather than denying any of her participation in the crime, proudly admits her guilt. She defends herself and her actions. She defends her right to act on behalf of the dead against an untimely and unjust law. How about I remember to advance a slide? Techs in the booth, did that work? Look at that, come on. Antigone appeals to the chorus. She appeals to the people of the city. They're men, they're a chorus of men in the original play. They're advisors, they're the demos, the Greek population. She appeals to them that it's her obligation to bury her brother, no matter the charge, no matter the consequence. She argues that her relationship is without equal, that even the love between parents is not as profound as the love between siblings. This is where Hegel gets his evidence. Antigone doesn't do this gently with a whole bunch of diplomacy. She's defiant. Enraged by Antigone's lack of remorse, Creon finds her guilty of a capital crime and changes his mode on a whim. His mode of execution declared at the beginning was stoning, and he alters that to death by starvation, sentencing Antigone to death in a desolate cave, sealed away from the light to be buried alive. in this play, and here's the serious comparison with contemporary crime and punishment, audiences witness in Antigone a kind of state power. In his book called The Authority of the Dead, Unburied Bodies, James Martell describes the plot of Antigone and compares it to current day examples. So, for example, in the United States, Michael Brown, who was targeted for having walked in the middle of the street rather than on the sidewalk in Ferguson, Missouri, was shot to death by police officer Darren Wilson, and Brown's body was left in a pool of blood for 4 hours. In Turkey, Kevser Elturk, also known as Akin Wan, a Kurdistan Workers' Party guerrilla, was shot dead by Turkish security forces, and her naked, bloody body was left on display in the street. In this 2018 book by Martell, he explores, alongside these violent examples of bodies desecrated by the state, Homer and the Iliad, where there too, in that literary example, 2 bodies are defiled. First, if you know the story, the body of Patroclus is violated by the Trojans, and then, in a horrendous scene, the body of Hector is violated by Achilles. Martell draws attention to these mythological instances that are unfortunately paralleled by current day occurrences. Another example, Martell writes, is the huge number of Native American remains that, rather than being buried, are often unburied and then held in storage or display in museums and anthropology departments across the United States, among other places where this kind of practice occurs. Extrapolating from Martell's research, we know that Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission identified 3,200 deaths in its register of confirmed deaths of named residential school students and the register of confirmed deaths of unnamed residential school students, 2015. For just under 1/3 of these deaths, that's 32%, the government and the schools did not record the name of the student who died. For just under 1/4 of these deaths, that's 23%, the government and the schools did not record the gender of the student who died. For just under 1/2 of these deaths, that's 49%, the government and the schools did not record the cause of death. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, numbers 71 to 76, are on missing children and burial information. Those calls to action are as follows. Number 71, we call upon all chief coroners and provincial vital statistics agencies that have not provided to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada their records on the deaths of Aboriginal children in the care of residential school authorities to make these documents available to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Number 72, we call upon the federal government to allocate sufficient resources to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation to allow it to develop and maintain the National Residential School Student Death Register established by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Number 73, we call upon the federal government to work with churches, Aboriginal communities, and former residential school students to establish and maintain an online registry of residential school cemeteries, including, where possible, plot maps showing the location of deceased residential school children. 74, we call upon the federal government to work with churches and Aboriginal community leaders to inform the families of children who died at residential schools of the child's burial location, and to respond to families' wishes for appropriate commemoration ceremonies and markers and reburial in home communities where requested. 75, we call upon the federal government to work with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, churches, Aboriginal communities, former residential school students, and current landowners to develop and implement strategies and procedures for the ongoing identification, documentation, maintenance, commemoration, and protection of residential school cemeteries or other sites at which residential school children were buried. This is to include the provision of appropriate memorial ceremonies and commemorative markers to honor the deceased children. 76, we call upon the parties engaged in the work of documenting, maintaining, commemorating, and protecting residential school cemeteries to adopt strategies in accordance with the following principles. 1, the Aboriginal community most affected shall lead the development of such strategies. 2, information shall be sought from residential school survivors and knowledge keepers in the development of such strategies. And 3, Indigenous protocols shall be respected before any potentially invasive technical inspection and investigation of a cemetery site. You can find these calls to action, 71 to 76, easily accessible on the Truth and Reconciliation website. This current example gives me a chance to extrapolate on Martel's research, which in its conclusion says that the play Antigone ultimately is a display of authority. A state, says Martel, or some corresponding authority system that won't bury its victims, it seems it's an entity that is so powerful as to be able to do what it pleases. The dead bodies on display appear as warnings against others who might try to defy the state. It suggests further that the state is, in effect, above its own laws, and it can afford to flout conventions of decency and humanitarianism. Creon's decision is, therefore, a declaration of the true power of sovereignty, its monopoly on violence, and its threat towards rights. Creon acts with impunity. Otherwise, he could be charged with going against the gods, the very sentiment that I can find embedded in 182 of the Criminal Code of Canada, the section that determines treatment of a dead body. In 182 of the code, every person is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 5 years, or is guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction, who neglects without lawful excuse to perform any duty that is imposed on him by law or that he undertakes with reference to the burial of a dead human body or human remains. If only Antigone could have used this law against the lawmaker, but she remains in custody. As Antigone has said, Creon is just too strong. Creon almost punishes Ismena too. He calls her a venomous snake and accuses her of committing conspiracy and almost treason. In Canada, This would be conspiracy in the criminal code. That's number 465. Except where otherwise expressly provided by law, the following provisions apply in respect of conspiracy. Everyone who conspires with anyone to commit murder or to cause another person murdered is guilty of conspiracy. Anyone who conspires to prosecute a person for an alleged offense, knowing it's not true, that person is committing conspiracy. And anyone who conspires to commit an indictable offense, they're committing conspiracy. Would you find Ismena guilty of committing conspiracy? Ismena incriminates herself after the fact. She says she shared in the plotting and wants to shoulder some of the blame out of respect for her brothers. This would be accessory after the fact in the criminal code. Number 23, an accessory after the fact to the offense is someone who knows that a person has been party to the offense and gives or receives comfort or assists the person for the purpose of enabling that person. Would you find Ismena innocent or guilty of accessory after the fact? Innocent, yes. Antigone won't let her sister get away with this. Antigone protects Ismena from death while denying her the opportunity for self-pity and to take credit for the crime. Antigone won't let Ismena lie. She won't let Ismena take on the responsibility of the crime after the fact or to share in the honor it brings through death. Antigone is dragged away crying. A most painful thought, she weeps. Does my father's destiny determine my fate? Does the curse upon my mother's cursed marriage bed define my fortune? I was born of incest, and the sins of my parents now fall on me. Their punishment ends my life. My brother Polynesius, his death kills me. She moans, wretched me, I have no home, not with humans or with corpses, not with the living or the dead. Without lament, without a friend, without mourning, without marriage music, I go to a miserable place along a desolate road, unwed, unwept. I am so wretched that I can no longer look upon the sacred sun. The chorus of men warns Creon against this decision he's made. The chorus cajoles and urges Creon to change his mind. They think he's made the wrong decision. The chorus wants Creon to be more like a willow bending in the breeze, but Creon refuses to bend. The chorus advises Creon to be like a good captain of a ship of state and trim the sails to suit the shifting of the winds. Creon is resolved to stay his course. Creon's son Haman tries to bully his father into changing his mind, and then he begs him, if not because Antigone did the right thing, then please spare her because she's my fiancé and cousin. Creon denies both logical and emotional arguments. Tiresias, the blind prophet, whose statistics are pretty good when it comes to predicting disaster for this family, he enters the scene to caution Creon to repeal this bad judgment. Creon starts to doubt himself. He wavers, then reconsiders, then rushes up the hill to the cave. Creon changes his mind too late. Antigone has hanged herself using the fabric of her gown rather than waiting to starve to death. In a Romeo and Juliet moment, that precedes and influences the Shakespearean plot. Haman has beat Creon to the cave, has his arms wrapped around his deceased beloved, and takes a stab at his father before impaling himself on a double-edged sword. Tragically, when Creon's wife Eurydice hears the horrible news that both niece and son have died, she takes her own life. Creon is bereft, guilt-ridden, and prays for forgiveness. He is ruined, unfit to rule, and pleads for quick death. So, this play emphasizes the tension between man-made laws and belief in a higher set of values that guides human behavior. But rather than viewing the play as a defeat of activism in the face of overpowering authority, Martel concludes that the play gives an example of how a ruler's attempt to use a corpse as a vehicle of state power can backfire disastrously. Antigone does succeed in undermining the power of the state in the end, because everyone knows that she broke an unjust law. The rulers are exposed for their foolish brutality, and the elders remind us that arrogant men bring on great blows of punishment. The chorus advises us not to act impiously towards the gods. The chorus chants that wisdom is the most important thing. And we become just a little more wise by using Antigone to parallel current Canadian laws and legislation, crime and criminological factors. The play teaches us about moral challenges, the pursuit of justice, and personal conscience versus state authority. It illustrates the repercussions of acting against oppressive rule and the personal sacrifices required. But let's return to why we think Antigone committed her crime. Is it because of the theories I've proposed? Because of faith being such a strong factor? Or because of this Hegelian analysis that brotherly love drives her behavior? Or is it because of that fifth risk-need factor in the central 8 of the GPCSL perspective? Here's the 8. Number 1, criminal history. Do you think Antigone has some criminal history? 2, pro-criminal companions. Does Antigone hang out with people who have also committed crimes? Yeah, she does. She's exposed to them. They're in her family, for heaven's sakes. Anyway, in this time period, as a woman, you already heard one kind of social slur in the introductory scene. You know, these gals, both sisters, are raised in a world where women are meant to be obedient, full tilt, with no questions asked. So this kind of social influence beyond her family would also affect her potential to be fully law-abiding. Number 3 is pro-criminal attitudes and cognitions. And this would arise, for example, in our logic, using the tool today, by arguing that Antigone was exposed to violence as a child. And so she has a pro-criminal attitude about the law because of the way her family has broken the law in the past. Number 4 is antisocial personality pattern. You could stretch this a little. There's not a lot of evidence for Antigone having any mental illness that we would diagnose today, unless you believe Ismena, who calls her mad, or unless you argue that her isolation as a girl in this community would actually have impact on her mental well-being. Number 5 is education and employment. Antigone, as the child of a wealthy family, would have had access to lots of materials, probably would have been able to read, but she doesn't have access. Her movement would be impeded. Family and marital, we looked at. Substance abuse is a possibility. There are references to a lot of red wine being drunk. Maybe Antigone was exposed to this as a child. And leisure and recreation is another factor that we use to assess the risk and the needs of offenders in Canada. Antigone, again, with her wealthy Theban lifestyle, likely went horseback riding and for great walks in the woods, and maybe did some arts and crafts and sewing too. So leisure, I don't think, is the main driving factor for Antigone's behavior. I am more aligned with the comparisons between brother, sister, sibling connection, and perhaps too, looking to do a little more study of strain theory, which we refer to in our INTR 104 course. Strain theory is when individuals may resort to deviant behavior when faced with societal pressures that conflict with their own values. This is pretty much a 1992 connection that could clearly be argued in this parallel. The conflict between man-made law and divine law can be looked at through a legal positivism outlook and a natural law perspective. And certainly we can connect this to contemporary Canadian society. Conflicts over environmental protections, for example, and land rights remind me of the story of Antigone. And so let me close now with an example of an activist in recent Canadian history who, like Antigone, valued his conscience over the laws of the state. Some of you will remember last fall when, in the capacity of my position as Human Rights and International Solidarity Chair for the VIU Faculty Association, I'm able to bring speakers to campus for them to present their perspectives on any number of rights and freedoms that we decide to focus on. And so last fall, it was a real honor to bring Chief DeSalle from the Wet'suwet'en Territory to campus. It was in February, and this special guest presentation gave the hereditary chief of the Fireweed clan. His English name is Adam Gagnon. He was able to tell his story about being arrested and charged with criminal contempt after his environmental activism against the construction of a liquefied natural gas pipeline on ancestral, unceded Wet'suwet'en traditional territory. During a historic 3-year trial, in July 2024, the chief was found guilty of violating a 2018 injunction that prohibited impeding the construction. Despite strong arguments asserting that Chief DeSalle was acting in accordance with Indigenous law by protecting the 22,000 square kilometer territory from trespassers, such as industrial developers entering without consent, the Supreme Court of British Columbia sentenced him to 60 days under house arrest. After an in-depth investigation into the human rights infractions inflicted during these peaceful demonstrations, Amnesty International published the report, Criminalization, Intimidation, and Harassment of Wet'suwet'en Land Defenders. And Amnesty International named Chief DeSalle as Canada's first prisoner of conscience. When the chief spoke, he told the story Basically what happened, in my own words, was they had an incredible show of solidarity and community, and eventually, after months and years of trying to keep the machines at bay, the chief one day just took a little looky-loo up the steps of one of those mighty machines and saw that the keys were in the ignition. He knew how to drive heavy machinery with his background in construction, turned the key, and started to roll. Those machines don't move quickly, but it takes a long time to get them to change direction, so he made it some distance before being blocked on a bridge and taken down by the RCMP. This story of Chief DeSalle is an opportunity for me not to celebrate the fact that this kind of civil disobedience or belief in your higher values still exists today. It's not that I'm proud of that, but I'm happy to have this past example to build a literary opportunity for us to do a comparison on laws and legislation, our responses, behaviors, and criminological factors that govern us. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm going by gut instinct. I think I'm on time. If I haven't talked enough, believe me, I have more to say on this topic, but this is actually your chance to propel the dialogue. There's absolutely time here today for us to ask some questions and perhaps to come up with our own examples of how you think this play connects to a type of criminal analysis. What do you have out there? Shall I share this mic? Ava? Yeah? In the booth. I'm taking the mic. We're going to use this one. See? Question.
Hello.
Hi.
Would you connect any other play? What plays would you connect to criminological theory like Antigone?
Can you just say that one more time?
Oh,
I didn't quite hear you.
What other plays or forms of media would you think could connect to criminological theory and Antigone?
Okay, I love that question because I have two examples from 5th century Greek tragedy right off the top of my head, okay? The first play, the one that precedes Antigone chronologically in the story of this doomed family, that's the one called Oedipus Rex. And that play I have compared in a past presentation and perspective paper. And it actually defines the crimes of Oedipus, which include, manslaughter, or was it first-degree murder? This is what we talk about in the crim class, wondering how it would be defined today in Canada. There's also instances in Oedipus Rex of suicide. And, in Canadian criminal history and in the justice system, a suicide has gone from being illegal to not being illegal. It's a bit of a riddle. So we can talk about that crime. We can talk about infanticide because of the story of Oedipus Rex, regicide, which is a rare crime of killing a king, and any number of minor misdemeanors against the good vibes of the city. So that's one example that clearly connects with my presentation today. The other Greek tragedy that I do a lot of research on is called the Agamemnon. And this is the first play in a trilogy of plays by a different Greek author whose name was Aeschylus. And in that first play of the only existing trilogy that has survived all these years, there's also heinous crimes committed, murder, adultery, and absolutely graphically described woes in the city. So the Agamemnon would be an interesting one to study, especially because the murder is in that play committed by a woman. And in Canada, the statistics on women who commit violent crimes is a whole focus. Statistically, women don't commit that many violent crimes in Canada, so you could get the data, you could compare the numbers, you could use that Agamemnon and the story of the great queen Clytemnestra to discuss in further detail that dynamic of female offenders. Yeah, thanks. What else are you wondering out there? Yes.
Sorry, I have this one written down. Whoa. What does Antigone teach us about the role of conscience in criminology? Do you discuss that? And about, is crime is it always about law breaking, or do you think it's just a flawed system that we have?
Okay.
It's a big question.
So the question is a question about intent, I think. So there's a difference in our Canadian justice system, legal system, where that differentiates between a person who accidentally commits a crime and someone who on purpose commits a crime. In Latin, this is called mens rea. It means you've been thinking about it and figuring it out, and you schemed up the whole plot. If someone is charged with an offense, they have the opportunity to say, I didn't mean to do it. And that's part of their plea, their defense of innocence, or kind of a little bit of innocence because they didn't do it with intent. In Antigone, she does it with full conscious purpose. There's no doubt about that. And she never tries to backpedal and say, oh, I didn't mean to bury my brother. Everyone knows that she did it with purpose, and she's not shy about declaring that and taking the punishment. So in this play, I think the intent is clear. Yeah? And what was the second part there? Bonnie, do I think the whole legal system is flawed? No. No, is the camera still running? No. I think we have always can make improvements. So the thing is, friends, is part of what attracted me to this research over my career is I'm the child of a criminal defense lawyer. So I grew up at the dining room table talking about crime and punishment, treatment, intervention, even though those weren't as trendy a term as they are now. You see, we call our punitive side of the system the correction system. We don't call it the punishment system. It's called the Correctional Service of Canada, not the Punishment Service of Canada. So you can tell even in that name that the intent of the laws and the carrying out of punishments ranging from fines to incarceration, these are meant in its core values to help people improve the quality of their lives. The problem, of course, comes from the system not having enough time to do a lengthy risk assessment, and punishments, penalties often further impede the offender, so they can't win for losing once they get released. The dream is they get released, there's been interventions, programming, treatments, and corrections that set the person up for success, changing those neural pathways, and those perceptions of what is right and wrong through training and education and guidance. The issue is, of course, that we don't have the resources quite often or the time to ensure that that package is delivered in the best way possible. And we have issues of recidivism for offenders that complete their penalties.
So clearly, the way that Antigone was sentenced was a little bit different than it would have been handled today. So out of curiosity, how do you think it would be handled today?
So the punishment for Antigone in this creative and dramatic work would have drawn attention to the norm of the era. And so with much a shudder, stoning, death by stoning, what a horrendous punishment to have, public stoning. So certainly that's way past Canada's history. In the case of Chief DeSalle, he was given house arrest, and had to wear the ankle band and be limited from his community. And that's the dig of the current day consequence. It is, without being overly dramatic, like death, a kind of death, to be ostracized from your community and to be discommunicated by the state, living in isolation. So that's the, 60 days house arrest is the easy way to say it. Certainly much better than being locked up in a cave to die, but a loss and a time of grieving and struggle nonetheless. Of course, intended to reteach the person to never do that again, right? But in the famous case of Socrates, who also in this period of antiquity was charged with a crime. Socrates was charged with the crime of corrupting the minds of the youth. So that's when I feel very, very privileged to be here. I'm allowed to talk about this today without being arrested. Thank you. Socrates was arrested and charged for corrupting the minds of the youth. And the Athenian government said, okay, you're a smart guy. We're going to give you two options, death or ostracization. And Socrates chose death because ostracization is worse. So I think house arrest, if you want to connect that to that spirit of exile, that's a punishment to be reckoned with. Yeah.
Thank you, Eliza, so much for this really thought-provoking presentation. I know that we have coffee and snacks outside waiting for us. So if I can take the opportunity, because I have the microphone already, can I ask one more question and then we'll head out for coffee? You, at some point in the presentation, you mentioned kind of like the culmination of tragic effects that subsequently lead to the usurpation of power.
Yeah.
And so that Antigone, in her death and in the subsequent deaths, actually successfully commits the end of that power, which was much bigger than what she had initially sought out. But I was interested in the fact that all of this seems to reside on death. Some of the examples today that you mentioned, Michael Brown, for instance, in order for something to change, a death, a tragedy must occur. I'm curious in your research if you had ever considered the power of comedy. I'm especially thinking of Jimmy Kimmel recently being taken off the air for daring to attempt to poke fun at the power of Donald Trump. So would it be a viable field for you, do you think, to explore the fact that a death does not need to happen for the laws to change?
I hope that's the way things will roll here in our near and global future. It's a difficult reality check because people, maybe not here in our community today, but in communities around the world, they are standing up for themselves at the risk of death. We don't have to face that from day to day as Canadians. Certainly, it hovers in the background. And so that ultimate sacrifice that an activist will take in order to change the law, historically it has happened. We can name famous people like Gandhi. Like Gandhi did it, but so many people had to die for him and his group to change so significantly the course of history. We have Nelson Mandela too. Similarly, putting himself at great risk and all of his followers for decades, suffering the punishments of the state for daring to speak out against injustice. It's a very risky position to put oneself into, but my hope is that you can do it without dying. Yeah, I mean, a democratic discourse about justice would feature a more diplomatic approach rather than this dastardly it doesn't matter the charge, it doesn't matter the consequence, I'll do it even if I have to die doing it. It's a very drastic kind of activism that is prevalent, around the world today. So maybe we can make the change and use great tragedies like this to keep the conversation going, because this is what academics offers us, the opportunity to have a type of freedom of speech not afforded to everyone or experienced by everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Eliza, for this fascinating lecture. If everybody would please join me in a round of applause to thank Eliza.
Thank you. We'll see you in the lobby.
So we'll head off to the lobby. Just as a final plug, we have our next colloquium lecture coming up on October 24th, same time, same place, 10 o'clock in the morning in Malaspina Theatre. We'll be hearing from Delaney Vallon, VIU alumni and author of Shapeshifters, a book of poetry. She will be speaking about a Métis counseling experience. More information can be found on the Colloquium website at viu.ca. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day.